The ceremony was already in full swing when I arrived at the Hargrove Military Honors Hall. White chairs lined both sides of the grand entrance. Flags hung perfectly still in the cool October air. Officers in pressed uniforms stood at attention along the marble corridor. Everything smelled of polished brass and fresh flowers. I held my invitation firmly in my right hand. Gold lettering. Official government seal. My name printed clearly at the top. Corporal Nadia Osei, Special Operations Division, Unit 7. But nobody here knew that name. Not the version of me they had built in their heads over the years. I walked through the entrance quietly, the way I had been trained to move. No unnecessary sounds. No wasted steps. Just forward. That was when I saw her. Diana stood near the second pillar, wearing a fitted navy dress, pearls at her neck, champagne glass in her hand. My older sister. The one who had told our family I had run away. The one who had called me unstable at every Christmas dinner for 7 years. The one who smiled at funerals and cried at parties. She spotted me at the exact same moment. Her eyes moved from my face to my invitation to my face again. And then she smirked. That small curl of her lip. That look that said, "You don't belong here." My chest tightened. Kept walking. Before we continue with our story, please like and comment the time you're watching this story, and also hit the subscribe button if you like stories like this. I had taken exactly 4 steps toward the registration table when the security officer appeared. He was young, maybe 25, with broad shoulders and a stiff posture that suggested he was still trying to prove something to someone. He stepped directly into my path. "Ma'am," he said, not unkindly but loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Are you sure you're supposed to be here?" I held out my invitation. He took it without looking at it. From the corner of my eye, I saw Diana shift slightly. She unfolded her arms and refolded them, angling her body toward the small crowd that had begun to notice the exchange. She tilted her chin upward just enough to signal to the people around her that she was watching this unfold with great interest. Then she leaned toward me and lowered her voice to something that was almost a whisper but was not really a whisper at all. "You've always been good at pretending, Nadia." The woman beside her, Aunt Corinne with her silver bun and knowing eyes, heard every word. A few other guests did too. I could tell by the way their expressions shifted, that small collective tightening that happens when people sense blood in the water. I said nothing. I stood straight and waited. My chest was tight but my hands were steady. Then I heard it. Heavy boots on marble floor. Approaching from behind me. The officer repeated his question. This time louder, with a firmness that carried across the marble lobby like a stone dropped into still water. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside while we verify your credentials." Heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. A group of senior officers near the far wall looked over. A woman in a red blazer whispered something to the man beside her. I felt every single pair of eyes land on me like small weights settling onto my shoulders. Diana stepped back. Just half a step. Just enough to create a visible distance between us, as though she were a stranger who had simply been standing nearby when all of this started. "Security might need to escort her out," she said softly. Her voice had that smooth, helpful quality she had perfected over decades. The tone that said, "I'm only saying what everyone else is thinking." A quiet laugh escaped from somewhere in the crowd. Controlled. But I heard it. And in that moment the memory hit me like cold water. I knew this feeling. I had felt it at 16, when she told our school counselor I had stolen money from her purse. I had felt it at 22, when she told our parents I had dropped out of university because I was lazy. She had always been precise. Always been careful. She had planned this. The security officer reached toward my arm. "Stand down." The voice was not loud. Did not need to be. It carried the kind of weight that fills a room without effort, the way thunder announces itself before rain arrives. Clear. Absolute. Used to being heard and obeyed. Every person in the lobby went still. The security officer froze, his hand hovering inches from my arm. He turned. Then he stepped back immediately. his posture snapping into something more careful. A captain walked through the parting crowd. He was tall, late 40s, with silver at his temples and ribbons across his chest that told a long story to anyone who knew how to read them. His eyes moved across the room with the practiced calm of someone who had seen far worse than a tense ceremony lobby. He walked past the officer, past Aunt Corinne, past the woman in the red blazer. He stopped directly in front of me. Diana's smile flickered, just briefly. A small, involuntary crack in her composure, like a hairline fracture appearing in glass before it breaks completely. She covered it quickly by taking a slow sip of her champagne. But I had seen it. The captain looked at me with an expression I recognized. Not pity, not sympathy. Something quieter than both. He had seen the file. He knew the record. He understood what was standing in front of him. He looked directly at me. And I waited. Without hesitation, the captain straightened his spine. His chin lifted. His right hand rose in one clean, deliberate movement. He saluted me. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It crashed over the room the way a wave crashes over rocks, total and consuming and impossible to ignore. Glasses stopped halfway to lips. Conversations died. Even the soft background music from the string quartet near the entrance seemed to pause, as though the musicians had forgotten what note came next. Diana's face drained of color so quickly it was almost frightening. The warm pink of her carefully applied blush suddenly looked painted onto something pale and uncertain. Her champagne glass tilted slightly in her hand before she corrected it. Someone near the registration table whispered. The words moved through the crowd like a current running beneath still water. Who is she? I stood perfectly still. My hands were at my sides. My breathing was controlled. 7 years of training had made stillness my default response to pressure. And right now every muscle in my body was holding that stillness like a wall. I did not return the salute. Not yet. The captain held his position. Patient. Waiting. He was giving the room time to understand what it was looking at. That was deliberate. He knew exactly what he was doing. And so did I. I looked at Diana over his shoulder. Her eyes were searching my face like she was trying to read a document written in a language she had never studied. The captain lowered his hand slowly and turned to address the room. Not dramatically. Not performing. Simply making sure that what came next was heard clearly by every person present. Warrant Officer Nadia Osei, he said. Special Intelligence, Unit 7. Decorated for classified operations, years 2017 through 2023. The security officer stepped back a full 2 feet. His clipboard lowered. His expression moved through several things quickly. Confusion, recognition, something close to embarrassment. Diana put her champagne glass down on a nearby tray. I watched her hand linger there for a moment longer than necessary, steadying itself. There must be some mistake, she said. Her voice was still smooth, still controlled. But something underneath it had shifted, the way a floorboard shifts under pressure before it creaks. Nadia she wasn't in any military program. We would have known. The captain turned toward her. He looked at her the way experienced people look at things they have already categorized and moved past. There isn't, he said simply. 3 words. No elaboration. No argument. Just a door closing. Aunt Corinne made a small sound. The woman in the red blazer put her hand over her mouth. Near the far wall, 2 senior officers exchanged a glance that carried a full conversation in half a second. The room was recalculating. I could feel it happening around me like weather changing. I spoke for the first time since entering the building. My voice came out steady. Not cold exactly, but clear in a way that left no room for misunderstanding. I didn't come here for recognition. The words landed in the silence like pebbles dropped into deep water. Simple. True. And somehow more powerful than anything complicated I could have said. A ripple moved through the gathered guests. I could see people beginning to connect things, pulling together fragments, matching timelines in their heads. The years I had been absent. The story Diana had told. The version of me she had painted for every family gathering, every phone call, every Christmas card that did not include my name. She ran away. She couldn't handle pressure. She always made everything harder than it needed to be. Diana's eyes were doing something I had never seen them do before. They were searching. Genuinely searching my face the way you search for something you have lost and only just realized you need. For 7 years she had looked at me with certainty. With that smirk, with that tilted chin, with that comfortable confidence that comes from believing you hold all the information. She did not look certain now. She looked like someone standing at the edge of something much larger than she had prepared for. A voice from the middle of the crowd asked the question quietly but clearly enough for everyone to hear. How long has she been hiding this? I let the question sit for a moment. Not to be dramatic, but because some answers deserve space before they are spoken. 7 years, I said. The number moved through the room like a slow exhale. 7 years. The same 7 years Diana had spent telling our family I had failed. The same 7 years she had answered questions about me with a practiced sigh and a sympathetic shake of her head. We don't really know where she is. She was always unstable. We did our best. I explained briefly. Classified placement. Restricted movement. No public records by design, not by accident. The kind of work that does not appear in newspapers or social media timelines or family photo albums. The kind of service that asks you to disappear completely so that other things can remain safe. Murmurs moved through the crowd. Not the skeptical kind from earlier. Something different now. The sound people make when understanding replaces assumption. Diana shifted her weight. I saw it. A small adjustment of her feet, the kind your body makes when the ground beneath you no longer feels as solid as it did. She had spent 7 years building a story about me in this family's mind. She had laid every brick carefully, smoothed every edge. It was a good structure. It had held for a long time. But structures built on false foundations do not fall gradually. They collapse. She stepped forward and her voice cut through the murmurs with practiced brightness. Okay, she said. Let's not make this into one of her stories. Diana laughed. It was the right kind of laugh, light and slightly tired, the kind that suggests the laughing person is very patient with someone who is being unreasonable. You know how Nadia gets, she said to no one and everyone at once. She's always been creative. Always had a flair for the dramatic. A few of the older relatives nodded. I could see it happening. Aunt Corinne's expression softened slightly. One of our cousins, Bertrand, shifted uncomfortably and looked at the floor rather than at me. Old habits are powerful things. Diana had been writing this narrative for so long that parts of it had settled into the family's understanding like furniture. You stop questioning it after a while, it just becomes part of the room. She pressed forward, her voice gaining steadiness as she felt the crowd move slightly back toward her. And honestly, the last few years, she paused, looked around with a careful expression. She's made some choices that were hard for all of us. I'm not going to stand here and list them. I love my sister. The words I love my sister landed precisely where she intended them to. A few people visibly softened. The captain had not moved. He stood slightly to my left, watching with an expression of careful, contained patience, like someone watching a chess match whose outcome they already know. I let Diana finish. I did not interrupt. I did not rush. Because I had been trained to wait for the right moment. And I knew exactly when it was coming. I let 3 full seconds of silence pass after Diana finished speaking. Then I asked one question. Did you tell them to question me? The room contracted. That is the only word for what happened. Every person present seemed to pull in slightly, like a collective breath held. Diana's face did not move. But her body did. It was barely visible. A slight stiffening of her shoulders. A fractional tightening around her eyes. The kind of involuntary physical response that the body produces before the mind can stop it. 1 second. Maybe less. But I had been trained to read rooms. And I had spent my childhood reading Diana specifically. I knew every signal she produced. I had catalogued them the way a scientist catalogues specimens, because surviving in my family had required that kind of precision. Three guests near the entrance exchanged glances. I watched their eyes move to each other and then back to Diana, the way eyes move when people are silently confirming what they both just observed. They had seen her earlier, standing near the security desk, leaning in, talking to the officer who had stopped me. One of them said nothing, but they did not need to. Their expression said it clearly enough, and Diana saw them see her. Her chin lifted just slightly higher. Her grip on her own composure tightened. The crack in the wall was growing. The staff member was young. Her name tag said Petra. She had been standing near the registration table the entire time, clipboard pressed against her chest like a small shield, watching everything unfold with wide, uncertain eyes. She hesitated for a long moment. I could see the calculation happening on her face. The weighing of what was right against what was safe. That hesitation is one of the most human things in the world. I did not rush her. Then she stepped forward. "Yes, ma'am." Her voice was quiet but clear. She was looking at me, not at Diana. "She did ask us to check you specifically. Before the event started. She said you might try to attend without proper credentials." The room turned on Diana the way weather turns. Not slowly. All at once. Whispers became audible. The sound was no longer the gentle murmur of confusion. Had an edge now. The sharper sound of people revising their opinions in real time. Diana's polished surface began to show its cracks. The smile was still present, but now it sat incorrectly on her face, slightly displaced, like a picture hanging a few degrees off-center. You could see it if you were looking, and now everyone was looking. Bertrand had stopped staring at the floor. Aunt Corinne's expression had closed into something careful and unreadable. Diana's eyes moved rapidly across the room, reading faces, calculating. I recognized that motion. She was assessing damage. Looking for allies. She found fewer than she expected. Diana played the only card she had left that still held any value. She pressed both hands flat against her chest, and when she spoke, her voice carried the precise texture of someone who has been deeply wounded. "I was protecting this event. I had no way of knowing. I mean, nobody told me she was. How was I supposed to know?" She let that sit for a moment. Then softer. More private sounding, even though she intended every word to carry. "She's my sister and I love her. But she's had episodes before. Situations where her judgment wasn't, where things weren't entirely clear to her. Our family has managed it privately because that's what families do." Episodes. That was the word she chose. Careful, clinical, impossible to directly refute. Several of the older relatives adjusted their expressions back toward uncertainty. Aunt Corinne looked between Diana and me. Our cousin Bertrand folded his arms slowly. The word unstable hovered in the air between us the way it always had. Diana had planted it in this family's vocabulary so long ago that it had grown roots. Doubt began drifting back through the room like smoke. Felt it. I had felt it before, many times in many rooms. That moment when the ground you were standing on becomes uncertain again. When the people watching begin to wonder which version is true. I looked at the captain. He gave me a single, almost invisible nod. I was done staying quiet. I did not raise my voice. I never raise my voice when I mean what I am saying. Loudness is for people who are not sure they are being believed. My name was removed from every public record in January 2017, I said. By government order. Not because I failed, not because I was unstable, not because I ran away. Because the work I was assigned required complete anonymity. I paused to let that settle. During those 7 years, Diana told our family I had abandoned everyone. She told Aunt Corinne I had a breakdown. She told Bertrand I had legal problems I was hiding from. She told our parents before they passed that I had chosen to disappear. I watched every name land on the person I had spoken it to. Aunt Corinne's hand came up slowly to her mouth. Bertrand unfolded his arms. Every holiday, every family call, every conversation where my name came up, she filled the silence with a version of me that she designed. Not because she was confused about where I was, but because my absence gave her room. The captain had not moved. He watched without expression, but the attention he gave my words was total and serious and visible to anyone who looked at him. Diana's jaw tightened. "Room for what?" someone asked from the crowd. I looked at my sister. "Room to be the only one." I did not want to say the next part. I want to be honest about that. Some truths cost something even when they need to be spoken. This one had been sitting inside me for 7 years, compressed down into something small and heavy that I had carried without complaint because the work required it. "The reason I disappeared was not my choice alone," I said. "In late 2016, a situation developed that involved national security risk in a specific domestic region. I was approached because of my language training and my background. I was asked to go dark. No contact. No records. No public identity. I looked at the faces around me. That meant my family believed I was gone. It meant Diana could say whatever she wanted, and there was no version of me present to contradict her. It meant our parents spent their final years thinking their younger daughter had abandoned them." My voice stayed level. "Steady." But I felt the weight of that last sentence in a way that was different from everything else. It was the part that still hurt at 3 in the morning. The part that no promotion, no decoration, no official acknowledgement could fully address. Murmurs moved through the room again. Different this time. Slower and heavier and lined with something close to grief. The captain nodded once. Diana's panic was no longer subtle. I could see it moving behind her eyes the way fire moves behind a window, contained for now but unmistakably present. Diana broke. Not completely. Not in the way people break in films with tears and fallen knees. Diana was too controlled for that. But the break was real. "Don't act like you're better than us," she said. The words came out faster than she intended. Louder than was calculated. With a rough, frayed edge that none of her previous sentences had carried. The room responded immediately. Not with words. With posture. With a particular stillness that comes over people when they witness something that feels wrong, something that doesn't match the careful image a person has been building. Diana had spent this entire evening presenting herself as reasonable, patient, concerned. That sentence did not fit any of those things. It sounded desperate. Bertrand looked away from her. Aunt Corinne lowered her hand from her mouth and straightened her spine in a way that communicated more than a paragraph of words would have. 3 guests near the back wall, senior officers I did not recognize personally, exchanged a look. Not the uncertain kind from earlier. The kind shared between people who have just been given the last piece of information they needed to form a complete picture. The woman in the red blazer, who had been uncertain throughout, now had an expression of quiet resolution. Diana seemed to realize immediately what she had done. She pressed her lips together. She glanced around. She tried to reassemble the composure she had cracked. But the room had already recorded it. Something important stepped forward. Colonel Adiz Ewa had been standing near the far end of the room for most of the evening. I had noticed her when I walked in. Tall, immaculate uniform, the kind of quiet authority that does not announce itself because it does not need to. She walked forward now. Measured steps. No hurry. She stopped beside the captain and addressed the room without raising her voice. "I am authorized to confirm that the service record referenced here is genuine," she said. "I am not at liberty to disclose specific operational details. What I can confirm is that the individual standing before you served with distinction under conditions that required complete personal sacrifice, including the suspension of all personal and familial contact." She looked at Diana. Not unkindly. But without any softness either. Any narrative suggesting otherwise is incorrect. The captain nodded in agreement. A single, deliberate movement that carried the full weight of everything the colonel had just said. The room had its proof now. Not just the captain's salute. Not just Petra's testimony. Not just my own words. An official confirmation from a senior authority who had no personal stake in any of this, who had come forward not for drama but because truth, when it is within reach, should be named clearly. Diana's power in this room, the social authority she had carefully built through years of positioning, dissolved in the space of 40 seconds. She had nothing left to stand on. I watched it happen, and I want to tell you it felt like victory. Did not feel like victory. Felt like watching a building come down. There is nothing enjoyable about that, even when the building was built wrong, even when it needed to come down. The sound it makes, the particular quality of the collapse, stays with you longer than you expect. Diana's allies began their retreat quietly. The cousin who had been nodding at her earlier found something important to look at near the window. The two women who had laughed during the security officer's questioning had become very interested in the refreshments table. Aunt Corinne moved 3 steps to her left, which placed her clearly on a different side of the room from Diana without requiring her to say a word. The whispers were no longer speculative. They had the flat, certain tone of conclusions being reached. Diana stood alone in the center of it, still upright, still holding herself with a kind of brittle dignity, but smaller than I had ever seen her. The pearl necklace that had looked elegant an hour ago now looked like something she was wearing for the first time and was not quite sure how to carry. She turned toward me. Her eyes were not cold anymore. They were furious in the way that people become furious when they have run completely out of options and are not willing to accept that fact yet. "Why?" she demanded. The word was low and sharp. "Why would you do this? Why come here? Why now?" I held her gaze. I did not look away. I did not soften my expression to make her more comfortable, but I did not harden it either. I just looked at her the way you look at something that is exactly what it is, without adding anything to it. "You never wanted the truth," I said. "You wanted control." The room was so quiet I could hear the slight intake of breath from the woman in the red blazer standing 6 feet to my right. Diana opened her mouth. Then she closed it again. And that silence, that brief, involuntary pause, was the most honest thing Diana had done in the entire evening. Because Diana always had an answer. Diana always had the next sentence ready before the previous one had finished landing. She had spent a lifetime moving through conversations like a chess player who had already memorized all the responses. She did not have one now. Continued quietly. "You didn't erase me because you hated me. You erased me because I was gone and it was convenient. And every year I stayed gone, the story got a little more comfortable for you. A little more settled. I became easier to explain than to acknowledge." Aunt Corinne made a soft sound. Not quite a word. Bertrand looked up from the floor finally. His expression had changed from discomfort into something that looked closer to recognition. Diana's jaw worked silently. She had no answer. And we both knew it. I looked around the room once before I said the next thing. Then I looked back at Diana. I knew about this before I arrived tonight. The gasps were immediate. Several of them. Overlapping and genuine. The captain, who had been still as stone for the last 10 minutes, allowed himself the smallest movement, the faintest upward shift of one corner of his mouth. Not a smile exactly. More the expression of someone watching something unfold exactly the way they expected. Continued. "I was contacted by Colonel Yua's office 6 days ago. She informed me that an anonymous complaint had been filed with Event Security, describing me as a likely imposter who might attempt to gain unauthorized access to this ceremony." Pause. The language in that complaint was very specific, very detailed. It described my appearance, my likely entrance time, and my probable behavior if questioned. I let that sit. There is only one person who knew all 3 of those things before this event. Every head in the room turned toward Diana. She did not move. She stood with the stillness of someone who has just heard a sound in the dark and cannot yet determine where it came from or how close it is. "I chose to come anyway," I said. "I wanted to see how far you would go." I had been prepared for her to deny it. I had been prepared for her to argue. I had been prepared for another appeal to the family, another invocation of my so-called instability, another performance of patient suffering. What I had not fully prepared for was the silence. Diana said nothing. She stood in the center of the room and looked at me, and the thing I saw on her face in that moment was not anger anymore. It was not calculation. It was something I had not seen there before. It was the expression of someone who has finally been seen clearly, and does not know what to do with that. The humiliation you planned for me tonight, I said, is the experience you are having right now. That is not something I engineered. You built it yourself, piece by piece, and I simply showed up and let you finish the construction. The symmetry of it was visible to everyone in the room. The officer she had briefed, the words she had planted, the crowd she had positioned as her audience. All of it had turned around and was now facing her. The crowd had fully shifted, not in a loud or violent way. In the quiet, final way of people who have made a decision and are not going to unmake it. Diana looked smaller with each passing second. Not because anyone was pushing her down, but because the space around her was no longer holding her up. What happened next was not dramatic. That surprised me, though it probably should not have. People did not shout at her. Nobody pointed or accused or performed their judgment for the room. Instead, the confrontation was quiet and firm, the way real things usually are. Aunt Corinne walked over to Diana slowly. She looked at her for a long moment with an expression I recognized from childhood. It was the look Aunt Corinne reserved for situations where words felt insufficient and unnecessary simultaneously. "We will talk," she said simply. Then she stepped back. Bertrand approached, but he looked at me rather than at Diana. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have asked more questions." He nodded. That was enough. I did not need more than that from him. Two of Diana's closer social connections, women who had been standing near her at the start of the evening, excused themselves from the area entirely. Not loudly, not with statements. They simply moved away and did not return. Diana's influence in this room had not been dismantled by a dramatic confrontation. It had been quietly withdrawn by the people who had been supplying it, one by one, the way you withdraw money from an account that no longer has a stable foundation. She stood where she was, bright, still technically composed, but alone in a way that had nothing to do with the physical space around her. I did not watch with satisfaction. I felt something older and quieter than that. I want to be honest about what happened inside me in that moment, because honesty is the only thing I have that Diana never managed to take. Still hurt. Standing in that room, with the captain's salute behind me and the colonel's confirmation on record, and every face in the crowd having turned toward the truth, it still hurt. The hurt was not the sharp kind. It was the deep, settled kind that lives in the part of you that remembers being a child and trusting someone completely before you understood that trust could be used as a tool against you. I spoke quietly. Not to the room. More to the air between us, between me and Diana. "I hoped you would have changed," I said. "Some part of me, the part that still remembers when we were children and you used to braid my hair before school, thought maybe this time would be different." The room grew quieter than it had been all evening. Diana's chin lowered. Very slightly. Almost imperceptibly. But I saw it. Even she looked shaken. Not in the way of someone caught and cornered. In the way of someone who has heard something true and cannot argue against it without revealing something worse about themselves. Aunt Corinne put her hand over her heart. The captain looked at the floor briefly. The empathy in the room shifted to something that included me genuinely, rather than simply supporting a position against Diana. They were no longer watching a confrontation. They were witnessing a wound. Someone in the room thought I was going to destroy her. I could see it in the way a few people leaned forward slightly. The unconscious physical language of anticipation. They had been watching the whole evening build toward something, and they were waiting for the final strike. The complete exposure. The public humiliation executed fully and without mercy. I understood the expectation. Diana had set me up. She had organized an orchestrated embarrassment at a formal military ceremony in front of senior officers and family members and strangers. She had spent 7 years constructing a false version of me in the minds of everyone who knew my name. She had used my parents' final years to cement that version while I could not be present to offer any alternative. The case for complete destruction was reasonable. I did not make it. "I'm not here to ruin you," I said. I looked at Diana directly. "I'm here to stop you." The difference between those two sentences landed in the room with the weight of something that could not be argued against or dismissed or reframed. Ruination is revenge. Stopping is protection. One is about the past. The other is about the future. Diana's eyes filled. Not completely. She was too controlled for that. But the shine appeared, and I could see her working to keep it contained. The captain looked at me with an expression that I recognized from operational briefings. The expression that acknowledges a decision made well under significant pressure. The room breathed. Hat was different. The captain stepped forward. He did not speak immediately. He gave the room another moment to absorb what it had just witnessed, and then he addressed me directly, formally, in the way that the military has of making recognition feel like architecture rather than decoration. Solid. Load-bearing. Permanent. Warrant Officer Osei, he said. On behalf of this institution, I want to formally acknowledge your service and your sacrifice. The years you gave, the contact you surrendered, the narrative you endured without public recourse. These are not small things. They are the kind of things that rarely receive the acknowledgement they deserve. He paused. They deserve it now. The respect in the room was no longer the polite, social kind. It was the heavier kind. The kind that comes from people who have genuinely updated their understanding and are sitting with what that update costs them. Several of the senior officers near the far wall had straightened. Not at attention exactly, but with the particular posture of people who are paying serious respect without being told to. Aunt Corinne was crying quietly. She was not the only one. Diana stood apart from all of it. Not removed forcibly. Not excluded by anyone's action. She simply existed at the edge of the circle that had formed, unable to enter it, unable to pretend she was not aware of its boundary. She could not meet my eyes. That was not a punishment. It was a consequence. And consequences, unlike punishments, are simply what remain when everything else is removed. I left the way I arrived. Quietly. Without announcement. I said goodbye to Aunt Corinne, who held my hands for a long time and did not try to fill the moment with explanation. I nodded to Bertrand, who nodded back with the expression of someone who has a lot of thinking ahead of them. I thanked Petra, who looked relieved in the way that people look when they have done something difficult and correct. I exchanged a final word with the captain and Colonel Yua. Professional. Warm. The kind of exchange between people who understand each other's work without requiring elaboration. Then I walked toward the exit. The marble corridor was the same as when I had entered. Flagged. Pressed uniforms. The smell of polished brass and flowers. But everything felt different. Not lighter exactly. Clearer. The way air feels after a storm has moved through, when the pressure has finally released and the sky is honest about what it is. The door I stopped. I do not know fully why. Training, perhaps. The habit of always checking behind you before you leave a space. Or something older than training. Something that simply needed one final look. Turned. Diana was still standing where I had left her. The room had moved around her the way rooms do when an event begins to wind down, people shifting toward exits and conversations and the necessary business of processing what they had witnessed. She stood alone. Not fallen. Not broken. But finally, fully, irrevocably seen. For the first time in 7 years, the version of me she had built in everyone's minds was gone. And for the first time in 7 years I felt it. I turned back toward the door. I walked out into the October air. And I did not look back again.